Welcome everybody. This is the start of the webinar this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. I would like to ask each of the panelists to just introduce themselves, give us a bit of a background on their past and history, and then relate that to the ESG from a US perspective. We can maybe ask Camille, would you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. This is Camille Hamzi, GRC Investment Group. We are single family office from Dubai, and we focus on alternatives with holdings in various countries. Our involvement in ESG go back many years, and we do demand in the last few years that ESG standards and every sub-metric is implemented in all our investments. Happy to be here and to join a great group.
Thank you, Camille. So jump to maybe Marina to give an introduction of yourself.
Thank you, Carolina. It's great to be here. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for organizing the panel. So I'm Marina Latis. I'm with 57 Stars. We're a global asset manager focusing on private equity and venture capital investments. I'm based in Washington, D.C. now, but we have quite global presence. We have offices in Europe and Asia, and a lot of our investments are global, but focusing on emerging markets, and in particular, Asia. We also have a dedicated impact investing strategy, and some of our focus areas are financial inclusion, healthcare, and environmental sustainability. So I focus on ESG within 57 Stars, and for us, it's always been fundamental for our investment process, and I'm happy to share more on that. And maybe to just go back to US landscape on ESG, I wanted to comment here that there's been quite a few exciting developments, a shift in ESG landscape in the States in the past few weeks, which I find very interesting in terms of regulations, for example, in terms of some of the statements even this week that we got from Department of Labor, that we got from the SEC. They just created a task force. You might have seen that on ESG. So it's quite, all of that sends a strong signal that there will be more stricter ESG disclosure coming, and so we as an industry have to be ready for it. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marina. Daniel.
Hi, Carly. Hi, thanks for inviting me. Great to be here. So a bit of background on Rio, if you've not come across us before. We're a sustainability software platform. We're here to help you improve your impacts on the planet, manage ESG risk and save money. So our customers are come in all shapes and sizes, from asset managers and investors to kind of large and small cap quoted companies, and even national institutions like the NHS and people like the Ministry of Justice in the UK. Our approach is based on three core pillars. So it's all about, so number one is skills and engagement. Number two is all about governance and compliance. And the third one's all around data and reporting. In terms of me specifically, I'm a bit of a sustainability geek. I've been doing this for about 20 years, starting out as a consultant. I've done my time as an investor as well. I've worked in clean technology investment and development. Most recently, I'm working in AI and software development. I'm incredibly excited about the prospects for ESG and sustainability more broadly in the US context. I think all the ingredients are there for it to be a leader globally. The wealth exists, the natural capital or natural environment exists, and I think there's this societal kind of aspiration now, which is evolving around sustainability not just being a trend, but being just a better way to conduct business in our lifestyles. I think supplementing that, there's a new presidential regime in town that's going to create big incentives for a responsible business, and I think it's really going to clamp down on environmental and social injustice. So for me, I'm incredibly positive to be here and talk a bit about this in the US context.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Daniel. And Karl, can you give us an intro?
Yes, hey, my name is Karl Andersen. I'm the founder and CEO of AV Group. We're an investment manager focused on climate solutions and Nordic ESG and impact. The bottom line is we invest in companies coming out of the Nordics, mostly renewable energy companies and smart city, smart society type companies, and then we scale them into places like the US. So we look for new IP, innovative IP, and then really apply them here in the US. I've been doing this for the last 6 years or so, since 2015, when the first price shock of oil kind of hit. Norway, being an oil country, really reformed a lot of their methods in investments in clean energy. So there's been a lot of venture capital in Norway doing this, but really the lack has been in the growth equity area. So that's what we really focus on. And I second Daniel. I think looking at the U.S. as a prospect, it's actually really exciting. The U.S., when it points its laser beam in a direction, it really goes there. And I think since last year, when oil really tanked, everyone is rethinking, including big oil, how they accelerate the portfolio to renewable energy. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but because also, frankly, the business models, the cost, the price points are much cheaper now to develop wind and solar and these other applications. And so sort of technology caught up to energy and has made it cheaper to get into. So I think it's, from a business perspective and from a social perspective, I think Daniel's right. There's a big tailwind with a presidential administration that very much encourages this activity. So thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you everyone for being here. And as you can hear, it's a very diverse panel, so today's discussion should be very interesting. To just jump off, maybe we can continue with Karl. Just from an asset manager's perspective, how do you incorporate ESG in your investment strategy? Is it a case of risk? Is it a case of return, or is it something else?
Our investment thesis, because we go after renewable energy, it makes it a little easier for us to fit into some of these categories. I know, scoring social and governance can be somewhat more nuanced and complicated. Renewable energy and carbon credits and this sort of thing, and calculating at risk is, I think, a little bit more easy. We also very much luck out because, in Norway, they've had something called HMS for the last 40 years, which translated stands for Health, Security, and Environment, which is what we call now ESG. So I would say, though, that our perspective is we do start with the companies first and build up from there, and it's sort of a bottom-up approach. I think a lot of fund managers, it depends on what you're talking about too when it comes to investment managers, because some are investing in public equities or their ETFs or their so it's more of this top-down kind of approach, negative screening. We're in growth equity, and so we're really underwriting the companies first, so we can actually get into the fabric of how the companies work, how they're diversifying, and how they're doing things, and we can sort of hit home at that ground level. But like I mentioned, it's kind of, we lucked out because they already had sort of these policies in mind. Now, when we bring those into the US, though, I think that it's very attractive for US companies to acquire companies that already have these standards involved. Because if you're gonna, apples to apples, a company that has sort of a strong ESG policy and all these corporates who are trying to acquire companies, how are they gonna price this relative to if a company has ESG versus not? How do they think about that when they're doing an acquisition? So these are the sorts of things that we've been sort of wrestling with. What's the premium that you pay? And we believe that it's a strong one. In fact, I work or share information with CIO over at MBIM, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and that's how they think too. I mean, the more you incorporate this at the foundational level of the companies, the better off you're going to do. In America, I know we're trying to do things like public benefits corporations, B Corps. I think those are really interesting. Patagonia's one and the like, and I think incorporating those sorts of things are interesting. But this is still early days, in that process. But
thanks very much, Karl. And Marina, what is your take on incorporating ESG in an investment strategy?
Well, here I have to agree with Karl. As a private equity investor, you have, and we invest in private equity and venture capital, both through partnerships, fund partnerships, and directly into companies. You have an opportunity to work very closely with the business models. You have, with the businesses you invest in, you have an opportunity to really work with GPs, companies, and help them improve in certain areas. So that's your value add from the ESG perspective. And over time, you can see that improvements in certain ESG areas, can lead to potentially stronger returns. So for us, it's definitely both risk management. It's part of our standard risk management practices during due diligence and monitoring of our investments. And we view ESG as a way to add value and ensure that our companies are sustainable over long periods of time. And we've seen it times and again. Last year we saw huge amounts of capital actually being poured into ESG funds. They've performed better than their traditional counterparts because the companies have proven to be more resilient over time because they have good ESG practices. And I think it's quite, it's quite intuitive. If you think about it, good labor practices, good relationships with your stakeholders, if you treat your employees well, if you have good governance practices, if you have good environmental practices, all of that can only add value and lead to sustainable value creation over time, and minimize risk over time. So I think of ESG as a very actually intuitive concept. And maybe I should mention here, I used to live in Europe for a few years before moving back to the States a year ago. And in Europe, it's very much part of conversation between GPs and LPs. It's part of fiduciary duty, ESG. While in the States, we're still debating, it seems, what ESG is. And we'll talk about education on this front more later, but there is still perception by many that ESG can somehow detract from financial returns when we strongly believe it's the opposite. And I was very happy to see, I think it was just yesterday, that Department of Labor published a statement that they actually will not enforce the ruling that was adopted during the previous administration here. That would really imply for pension plans that ESG could somehow compromise financial returns. So they will not enforce that ruling. So that means the shift also in terms of mindset here in the States, that ESG doesn't detract from financial returns, but actually can lead to potentially better financial returns, as we've seen historically, as we've seen last year. So definitely for us, it's both risk mitigation tool and an opportunity to add value when we work with our GPs and companies.
Thanks, Marina. Very insightful. And then from an investor perspective, Camille, I can maybe throw this one at you. What due diligence should investors do, and what kinds of questions should they be asking investment managers?
It's very important for the investor to be fully knowledgeable in the doctrine of the ESG. The acronym is only 3 letters, but it comes in many different guises. I have seen due diligence lists produced by leading asset and wealth managers that ranged from 7 questions, and I have seen at the same time on the other side the questionnaire of one of the largest sovereign wealth funds of the world, where the questions were close to 700 questions that you need to have check marks on them. And so it become more science than art, and I see it the other way around. I've been involved in this space, as I said, for many years. It's important to understand that what does the environmental stands for, and what does it protect or try to protect, and that goes also for social and governance. We can hold corporations always responsible for environmental and governance, and this is a personal opinion. But when it comes to social, it has to start from the family. I was recently, when I say recently, a couple of weeks before COVID, at the United Nations, and there was a round table of investors. I listened to colleagues speaking about protecting the water we drink, the food we eat, the air we breathe. But I was thank God the last one to speak. I said, "What about me?" And everyone looked at me. I said, What about educating the human? We need to do our due diligence. I know we're going to speak, like Marina said, about education later, but the due diligence starts from an educated expert. So I say to my colleagues in family office and in high network, there is no shame in hiring a consultant or an expert to represent you when you conduct due diligence. There is no harm in relying on rating agencies that maybe they are not accurate, or maybe they have a specific direction in what they cover in ESG, but they can be valuable. At the end of the day, you must build the skill and improve the skill of doing your own research. We can go through the regular questions that we discuss with a fund manager in general, regardless what is the portfolio company or the underlying assets in the fund and how many positions are there. But again, you can start the conversation by talking about the firm direction on ESG, and then the fund direction in ESG, about the manager and the team, okay, and about the key man. What is going to happen if there is a team of 7 people, but only one expert in ESG, and that person is absent, leaving the company, leave of absence, or just on vacation? Where do we stand on this? I do drive and demand, like I said earlier, on directions in ESG that create jobs and to create sustainable jobs. And the last unprecedented circumstances that we have been experiencing now for 12 months, maybe 12 months and some, did create the loss of jobs in many different sectors that we invest in. So maybe I gave a general answer. If you are looking for a list, I'm sure we all have lists of due diligence questions that we ask, but it's all about understanding what is the environmental, social, and governance all about. Is governance something related to the government? No. Governance is about a tax strategy, is about executive remuneration, is about corruption, bribery, is about the board diversity. What is the size of your quorum? 7 people. How many females are there? Okay. How many people of minority? And how do they get paid? How do you have consideration for cybersecurity to protect the portfolio company? When you talk about environment, it's a big general term, but there is so much in the environment. Is it the depletion of resources? Is it the greenhouses, the gases and emission? The renewable energy is part of the investments that I allocate sizable capital every year. But I do believe that all those renewable energies models that are still in their nascent stage, they are not scalable enough to compete with fossil fuel. And maybe at the same time, which something I invest in, is improvement on production and on the refining of fossil fuel that can reduce the green gases and the emission to the space. And while we are going through the process of improving the lithium, the liquid hydrogen, the liquefied natural gas, and then solar, we saw what happened to the windmills in Houston 2 weeks ago. They froze. What did we use to melt them? We went back to byproduct of fossil fuel. So we look at the car of Tesla. When we read that 82% of the car components is made out of fossil fuel byproducts. So are we there yet? So the line of questioning for a fund manager or for a GP can be extensive, and it is not in one meeting. Definitely you have to build a team and be prepared, especially the fact that not every investment applies to all the metrics of the ESG. If you are a law firm, I don't see your impact on the environment, but I see your impact on the social aspect and on the governance of your firm, and vice versa. If we're doing agricultural product, then we see that. If we are producing plastic, or if we are recycling biomass. So every investment require an expertise and the skill to apply.
No, thanks, Camille. It sounds like it's a lot about data and how do you slice and dice that data. So maybe this is a question for Daniel from a data and reporting perspective. How does that assist in showing investors what the funds are made of and avoiding greenwashing?
Oh, you gave me the greenwash question. Excellent. I think before we go, I think greenwash comes in several varieties as a connoisseur of looking for it. But I think before we go into kind of greenwash, like specifically, if we just take a step back and look at that reporting and data point, just look at the landscape. There's so many different reporting frameworks, ratings, scorings, self-proclaimed standards, all different but doing the same thing really fundamentally. Alongside that, you've got this societal driver that we've all been talking about around greater appetite for disclosure, more transparency, more accountability. And as Marina said, there are regulations coming now as well. Like it's getting more developed in the UK and the EU, but it's obviously starting in the States as well. So I'm just thinking about my business, and when I looked at what the opportunity was, it's really helpful. Yes, what we do is a reporting platform, but our aim isn't really to stop there or even start at that point. This is where we get to the data, and I think it's easy to say it's all about the data, which is close, but it's not exactly it. Because before you even get to the data, you've got to look at this concept of materiality. So what are the issues or the opportunities that can truly impact my business or the business I'm investing in from that sustainability perspective? I think once you've done that analysis, you can then move on to capturing the data, understanding what the hell is actually going on in that asset or group. But that's an absolutely crucial step to lay a foundation to avoid greenwash, is doing materiality, understanding the information. And then thinking about disclosure, and I think about our private sector clients and quoted clients in particular, and that the best thing you can do to avoid, to be effective and avoid greenwash is just capture data more progressively, capture information more progressively. I think we know many annual reporting cycles, especially around ESG or sustainability, take a few months of the year, are completed, then stop again, and then we go back and do the madness 12 months later. And if we can just encourage that consistent data capture and flex the kind of reporting, ESG kind of type reporting, as we do financial reporting, monthly management accounts, looking at best practice, the quality is going to improve massively, and what you can do with that information improves massively. And you effectively build this management system of operational control at the same time. And this is one thing that you guys do as investors as well, is you look at the money, you understand risk, and you can't, the ESG or sustainability is so multifaceted that you can't just expect to do it like that. There's a lot of information here, depending on how kind of industrial an organization is, as Camille was saying. If you're a law firm, maybe it is not very big direct environmental impact. Maybe it's your people pillar that you need to look at. But then that's quite right. What about your indirect impact? What about the clients that you're servicing? What about all that money, where it's flowing? There's lots of kind of angles to this that make it a bit more complicated on greenwash. So I would just say that the key thing here is just we can ensure regular data capture rather than this kind of these crazy periodic periods of intense data gathering, reporting with little data interpretation, little analysis. You get this mad rush to spin the results to make you look as good as possible, or think, oh, should I say that because it doesn't look good? What does look good mean? And what's the reference point? And that's greenwash, right? That's ultimately what we're doing, because we've not planned properly, because we've not committed to capturing information in the right way. Perhaps because all these reporting frameworks are telling us this is what it should be, missing out materiality, where we're in effect kind of perpetuating greenwash by not starting the process in the right way. So for me, ignore all the reporting frameworks to start with. Build the understanding, see what's out there, but just think about your own business and your own assets independently first. And then there will be a reporting framework to help you do that. But just be consistent on data capture, because that, to me, plan right, know what's material, have a responsible mindset, embrace transparency and accountability. You're going to avoid greenwash, or even actually be accused of greenwashing, which is the other thing. Sorry, I got a bit emotional then, but yeah, that's kind of an angle on it.
Thank you. I just quickly want to interject here and just mention to the attendees, if you have any questions, please do submit it in the chat. We will be told what the questions are and can bring it up during the panel if you have any different questions as well. But I'll be firing questions to the panel as well, but please feel free to ask questions. Marina, maybe I can jump to you in line with what Daniel was talking about, the reporting. What kind of reporting are you requirements are you seeing from investors, and kind of reporting that you do on ESG?
We as an investor in funds and then directly in companies, and we've invested in over 100 funds in the last 15 years. It's we see all kinds of different types of reports, different formats coming our way. So there is no, in private equity, venture capital, there is no currently sort of standardized way of reporting on ESG issues. There are some good companies, industry associations working towards standardizing reporting, like SASB, for example. I think they're doing really great work there. But from where I sit, and as I look through the different ESG reports that we receive on our underlying investments, some report on 10 metrics, some report on 20 metrics, 30 metrics. It's not really about the number of metrics you report on. It's, as Daniel and Camille mentioned, it's about materiality, identifying material issues for your sector, for your market, for your business model, and reporting, tracking metrics related to those material issues. And that's where I think SASB engagement guide, for example, could be very helpful, because it breaks down industries into subsectors and helps you to identify the right questions to ask for your sector, for your industry. For example, if you have a company in e-commerce, a company that's engaging with dealing with data centers, some of the ESG issues there that they have to manage would be very different from a network of hospitals, let's say. I mean, some of them might be the same, but some of the sector-specific issues, they're quite different and would require different ways of managing them, of course. So I would say materiality is key here. It's not so much about the number of metrics you report, but identifying material issues.
Correct, thanks. And Karl, have you found that the new generation coming through, are they asking different things from the funds, or is it basically the same things, we just now have a word for it?
I mean, younger investors, I don't know, I think they're more in tune with what's going on than a lot of the older generations. I think they're really trying to solve some of these issues and are extremely passionate about it. And they're all the technologists who are trying to invent new types of technology regarding smart cities, smart buildings, renewable energy. And they're sort of growing up with this and saying, why did you even consume oil in the first place? I mean, they're asking, to them, these are obvious questions. And for older people, it's like, why are we shifting to technology? So it's trying to find a balance. I think in general, they're going back to a little bit of what Camille said earlier on investors. It's difficult because ESG can be very confusing for a lot of investors who are not in this. They don't know what you're talking about. And unfortunately, when you're going to raise money for things that are focused on this, if the investor doesn't know what you're talking about, it's a pass. And so, but to bring in more investors, to be inclusive and try and get new capital into, sort of ESG and investments and build on this thesis, you have to be able to break down these components into bite-sized units so people can explain to their boards or their credit departments, easy things so that they can get their head around to report it. So, I mean, I think it's easier for us in a way because we're focused on renewable energy. So there's sometimes an obvious play. Now, I know Camille was saying that, the windmills had an issue with it and we ended up reverting to petrochemical, but I think that's a little bit better than having an oil spill, so like we're incrementally making our way there and nothing's going to be perfect along the way. I think we're going to have this push and pull kind of environment in the market, as we grow resources. So I think we just have to be mindful of that. I also think, in terms of sort of investment product, I also think it just hasn't been sort of supplied to the market yet. Again, I see when I look at the world of investments, I see a lot of ETFs, I see a lot of these publicly traded sort of things. But the private industry, I can't really name a CLO manager right now that's in climate. I can't name an asset-backed securities manager yet. I can't really, there's some consumer lenders, but we're not there yet. So when we're talking about scalability, I think there still is a lot of room for financial innovation to bring the technology of like the younger people into the structured product environment of more older senior people. And those two worlds need to sort of connect at a better level. I mean, we try and do that with our fund. I mean, we try and find great innovation, but then match it and marry it to how are we going to scale this? And maybe that's part of the issue. Maybe that's why only 100 billion or so is invested in this area, where you hear about it all the time on LinkedIn and you hear about all the buzz, but the substance, where are the products? Where are the things that really scale this stuff? So in renewable energy, I know that reinsurers, this hits their risk-based capital now. Hurricanes, forest fires, hailstorms. So they're shifting their portfolios on a risk-based capital level to start insuring some of these renewable energy technologies. Now that's a big difference because now once you have a premium priced from reinsurers, you can bring in capital markets, you can bring in equity markets, and you start building these capital stacks to really, fast channel some of these investments in hydrogen, in anaerobic digestion, in sort of these newer areas to convert from fossil fuel. But I would say too, from a younger investor perspective, which was striking to me to hear, and this is happening more maybe in Norway than other places, but their methodology isn't to sort of, and I know you hear about Greta Thunberg, so she's been a loud spokesperson out of the Nordics, but a majority of people think, how can we engage big oil? How do we decarbonize big oil industries? And to Camille's point, how do we get better refining systems? How do we get the technology to shift faster? So instead of sort of demonizing them and making it a political thing, really trying to say, what can we do? How are you guys trying to transfer? How can we decarbonize the process? And how do we not smash apart all the people who have jobs in that industry so that they can, be educated and transfer their skill set as an engineer from oil to hydrogen, which, in some cases isn't that far of a jump. So, it's a very inclusive conversation. I know the politics have obviously been, especially in America, have been very dynamic and in every direction. I think we got to tone it down a little bit and sort of focus on what are the solutions and how do we bring everyone into that conversation. And I think younger investors kind of understand that to a large extent. They reason from what Elon Musk really, popularized again, which is, sort of this first principles mentality. How can we from here fix the problem, knowing all we know now, using all the resources and data we have, solve the problem. So I don't know, younger people are super fun. I know my daughter, she's 5.5. I already have her flying drones. I'm going to bring her out to the solar fields soon enough and have her monitor some of the damaged solar fields. But anyways, yeah.
And then Camille, just to lead on from that, do you think it comes down to training?
There were a couple of things, interesting things that were mentioned by Karl also, which the benefit corporation. There is a lot of ambiguity here in the States about the benefit corporation, and Americans already gave it a nickname. They call it B Corp. So just like everything else, the benefit corporation so far is recognized. I'm not sure if it is 42 or 45 states already, and hopefully in the next few years, or hopefully less, it will be recognized on an entire federal theater. The B Corp comes with a commitment. And that differentiates the B Corp from the B certification, where some people read and they tell me, is the B Corp the B certification? No, the B certification is a private equity you have to pay for, and while the benefit corporation is another entity that you register, just as you register your S Corp, C Corp, or LLC. So it comes with the commitment, and it comes with the corporate guideline for their activity, and that really increases their value for those investors like us that are interested in investing and dedicated to the standards of ESG. But then we go back to the ambiguity. There are so many different acronyms, some by the United Nations of the SDG 17, and then the responsible investing, and then you have other organizations that come up with their acronyms that confuse the situation. Where I tell them, like, when a fund manager or when I receive an offering that says we focus on ESG impact, ESG impact and sustainability, I say, it's not clear. I like to invest with companies or with firms that have an overarching policy. If that company has funds that invest into firearms, for example, or into generic medicine that has bad reputation, that did its testing on people and it did cause harm in the past, I like to avoid those. I encourage my colleagues to have an overarching policy when they invest. For example, and I say this on every stage, I do not invest in tobacco. And that's a no, definite no. I don't care how many $1 billion extra we're going to make. I do not invest in pork for the obvious reasons. I do not invest in firearms. I do not invest into marijuana and into cannabis. And that sometimes raises questions, and principals or sponsors say, Camille, would you make a compromise? I cannot make a compromise. So I ask my colleagues, if you are in a position to maintain an overarching investing policy, demand the same from your counterpart. If I am going to invest in Scandinavia and my counterpart and colleague, personal friend, Karl, we will discuss this and we will bring it to the table, and we should be transparent about it, because the improvement in USA of the ESG investment is not going to come from the government, because we noticed in the last 10, 12 years, every direction from every administration has been politicized. Today, we have a pandemic that created about 15 million jobs that are not coming back. People who work in sports events, people who work in theater, people who work in cruises, in hotels, in airlines, all those businesses are going to shrink, and that will create unemployment. We need to believe in transitioning businesses instead of eliminating businesses to favor other businesses. We are moving forward. At the end, my final point, I find also socially in the United States, there is a disconnect between the millennials and also between the baby boomers. The baby boomers, many of them remain impacted by the article of Milton Friedman that told them your responsibility is to produce return, and then what your clients do with their profit is their business, to place it in any philanthropy of their desire, while the millennials talk about eradicating. I advise them use the term reducing. We cannot eradicate children labor. We can work on reducing it by avoiding companies that invest in children labor. And we heard about Nike in the past and many other corporations where the public had a pushback. We will not buy your sneakers because you are hiring kids 8, 9, 10, 12 years old, and you are paying them based on their age and not based on their output. That even double crime. We will not invest with companies that will invest, for example, in nuclear reactors. I know nuclear reactors to produce energy is probably has less carbon footing impact on the environment than other energies But I always ask them, what do you do with the nuclear waste? Where do you store it, waiting for it one day to decay? And what do you do with the water that you use to cool the tubes? You put it back in the San Francisco Bay, and you put it back in the Atlantic Ocean. How does that impact marine life? So there are many questions to raise when we take responsibility to be in this field. You know, when I talk to a company and I say, how many females you have on your board, and what's your maternity policy? You know, you give her 2 weeks. You think it's enough for a woman to have 2 weeks? I am a father, Carlin, and a grandfather, and I have seen, you know, the members of my family growing. I don't think 2 weeks is fair for a woman. She deserves more. Does that woman who have the same academic degree I have get paid the same like me? You know, what is the inclusion that you have? What are the opportunities for promotions that you have? And not only when we meet, but on an ongoing. So a lot of education is needed. Europe is definitely leading in the field. The United States will catch up, but it has to start from school. You know, throwing that bottle of water in the street or in the ocean for a whale or another fish to swallow it, that is, the fish doesn't know. We know. We need to be more educated from on all the entire scale, from that plastic bottle all the way to the waste that we produce by when we refine fossil fuel or when we produce energy using nuclear reactors. And ironically, the Paris Accord, when people think of Paris Accord, they think France is really the utopia of ESG and of a clean air. But France has, we know how many reactors. All you have to do is just go to Google and see how many reactors they have. What do they do with the nuclear waste? What do they do?
Final remarks, maybe I can ask Marina to start. Can you give us your final remarks on what we've spoken today? You know, how ESG impacts investment managers from investment strategies, the questions investors ask, and training that is still needed. What is your summary of today and your predictions for the future?
Oh my, we covered quite a range of topics today. And predictions for the future. Well, I think I would just say that, you know, and it's something that was mentioned today several times. ESG is, you know, you're never there. It's a process of continuous improvement. Yeah. But it's important to start engaging with the companies as an LP, with the companies and with GPs, and education is critical. And as was mentioned here, the US is still behind Europe, and we can learn a lot from Europe. And actually, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but this week, Europe actually rolled out the first phase of regulations. Since March 10th, you know, asset managers in Europe are required to do some sustainability disclosure. I think that was really interesting. That will have an impact on the States, definitely, because as a fund manager, if you want to market your fund in Europe, you have to comply with this requirement. So it's something that we here have to think about as well. So I would say it's a journey. You're never there, and it's a process of continuous improvement. And maybe others would like to add to this.
Now, Daniel, maybe what are your thoughts and also maybe your predictions for the future?
Well, I'm an optimist. It's very clear. I think we'll save the world, and without saying like Michael Jackson, make it a better place, which was exactly Michael Jackson's. But I think there's probably 6 kind of area. Don't worry, I won't go heavy. But I was thinking about the kind of education angle and the 6 themes, which probably is a good kind of roadmap for anyone kind of getting to learn in this sector or learning how to deal with it. And I think first of all, get to grips with the terminology. You know, ESG and sustainability, we've used them interchangeably today, but they are different. ESG is traditionally a risk assessment framework that complements financial due diligence, whereas sustainability is this bigger picture of, you know, societal balance on environment, social kind of goals and the economy for the benefit of the future generations. So It's one of those reasons that Camille's talking about. You can see companies that are perhaps not the most ethical, scoring very highly on ESG ratings because of good management, good reporting, good governance, but maybe kind of morally reprehensible from a sustainability or socially responsible perspective. The other angle is materiality, as I've already talked a lot about that, but just think about materiality at an asset level rather than a kind of category level. Climate risk, massive. TCFD, get the Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosures, just try and get a bit of an understanding around that. What does best practice look like from a reporting and disclosure perspective? Marina mentioned SASB and the CDP and various standards out there. And we do have like a free guide on our website, if Colleen and the team are happy to point you towards that, which is all about the different reporting standards out there. And I think learn about the broader sustainability issues. We're talking about finance here, but things like biodiversity management, biodiversity risk, waste, circular economy, health and well-being, kind of get into those broader topics as well and try and generate an understanding there. And then finally, I think just remember that we're, as far as education goes, we're all in this together as well as working. We're also global citizens, and there's a more blurred line than ever around how we work at home and how we go to an office and what are our responsibilities in the workplace from a sustainability perspective. So think about those things, how you can be more resource aware or resource efficient at home, how you can buy more ethically, and interchange them between the work head and the home heads, because it's exactly the same process. So yeah, I feel optimistic, and I think there are ways to get education to people much quicker. And like Karl, my daughter's already an eco warrior. She's only 5 years old. So we just got to give them the time. We've got to give them enough time to do their business, basically.
Thanks, Daniel. And then Karl, what are your predictions for the future?
Well, I think, fundamentally, I'm an optimist too. I mean, I think being a dad or granddad or mother or grandmother, you always want better for your kids. So, I mean, I think that's I agree with that. I think for the future, though, what I see is a fundamental issue in underwriting. And what I mean by that is, again, you have I think the focus needs to be on how we price a lot of these risks. Like reinsurers are just getting their heads around, they just issued a climate index at the beginning of last year. Now that's significant because it's not just a climate index for, marking to market. What they're doing is determining how their risk-based capital is affected. Climate is a risk, and how do you price it forward? You can see the effects already in hurricanes and hail and forest fires, etc. But what are the other risks that you can underwrite and price? I think that's important. I think that's a catalyst for more capital to come into these markets. And I think there's a lot of the innovation happening on the technology side, new ideas and new things. But are they scalable, as Camille said, and then how do we scale them? Tesla, the companies of the future. Is he an EPC company? Is he a tech company? Is he an infrastructure company? All of these types of companies are emerging, and they need sort of the connective tissue as financial support to help grow them. So I think if there's room for improvement, it's more in the underwriting sector and trying to get the various different types of commercial lenders, equity managers, CLO managers involved in that process to really help scale what's happening. And what's unique, and Camille pointed this out earlier, is this is investor driven. So investors do really hold the power here. It's kind of an interesting thing. It's more investors that are pushing this. The government's kind of holding on like we did it and trying to take credit, but I don't think so. I think this is actually, it is coming from the investors, which is really encouraging to know in the future. And you are seeing, again, like reinsurers and even central banks starting to look at this from a risk perspective and a pricing perspective. And I think then that translates down into returns and business models and the way people can organize capital around solving some of these issues. So I think moving forward, I hope that that's more robust, and and these things start getting to be more narrowly described. So yeah.
Thanks very much, Karl. So as everyone can hear, it's been a very broad topic, still a lot of work to do and some growth in this. Thanks very much for Camille, Karl, Daniel and Marina, for sharing your insights. Very, very interesting session. And we will follow this call also with some information to the attendees, as Daniel said, some information around the reporting frameworks and a few items from Camille as well. So thanks everyone for attending. We really appreciated you attending today. Thanks for the panelists for sharing your very good insights. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.